Hi, I'm Krista McAllister, and welcome to Cerius Leadership. Whether you are growing your business, growing your career, or quite possibly both, thank you for listening. Today, I am excited to have Amy Palazzolo. Amy, you've just led some of the large, bold technical transformations at one of the largest automotive companies in the US. I'm so excited to dive in. You know how many questions I have. Thank you so much for spending time with me today.
Yeah, Kristen, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to have this conversation and share some of my experience with you.
And it's been incredible because I've got to start with what inspired your passion for transformation and innovation, especially in such a traditional industry like automotive and very large company that's not necessarily known for transformation and innovation.
Yeah, Kristen, two things for me. One is just the world around us is changing so rapidly. Our customers, no matter what industry we're in, are expecting to have great digital engagement. And the other thing is the people, right? Just my passion for unlocking the potential that all of the people on our teams have and allowing them to be the best that they can be.
And with that, you've led a number of software engineering teams within a large company like Ford. How does it differ from traditional software organizations? Because I think software engineering, like you're sitting there writing code and developing applications, right?
Yeah, it's different in the sense that, having to be really clear about what is the goal that we're trying to achieve and the customer that we're trying to serve. And how do you do that at scale? It's fairly straightforward to have a small organization, small set of teams, work really well together to produce software. But when you're talking about orchestrating across hundreds and even thousands of teams, you have to have a more thoughtful approach.
And I know you've been speaking about your transformational work at a number of conferences. How do you foster innovation inside of an organization, knowing that it might take some time? Are you looking for those immediate hits and results in 3 to 6 months, or is this a 6 year time horizon and you've just got to be diligent about that?
Yeah, question, Kristen, and I think there's really a spectrum. If you think about a large organization, there are often different business functions within that organization. Some need to move faster than others. And so in those places where they need to move quickly and be responsive to a consumer on the other end of that experience, you do need to get some really quick wins and move quickly. But when you're talking about changing how you operate, especially an industrial company, that takes longer, right? To really address some of the structural issues that might be holding you back from where you want to be.
You mentioned structural issues. That's coming up quite a bit lately in conversations as to, hey, I want to implement technology. I want to implement AI. I just want to implement it. Okay,
Mhm.
what are we implementing it for? I'm sure you've had a number of those questions of what issues are we trying to solve here? What's at the heart of it? Let's go back a little bit and kind of talk through that. How do you know what customer need or what issue to address next in your transformation horizon?
That's a really great question. Um, hmm. It really comes back to keeping the customer at the center and understanding what their needs and pain points are. And we're all customers of our own products and services. And so, how do we make that customer's life easier? How do we save them time? How do we create a value proposition for them? Those are the places that you really want to start. But the interesting thing, Kristen, about transformations is a lot of people can think that it's just something I need to do within my software team, but it's really looking at how the organization operates and really interacts with that capability and allows it to kind of operate differently within organization structures that are used to dealing with much more physical products. And that's really where it becomes interesting, right? How do you how do you match the speeds of those two functions, right? When you're building products that can take years and sometimes decades to get to market, with the need to iterate quickly within and around those physical products.
You mentioned how do we? That's like, please, you are the expert. How do companies marry that? 'Cause you've mentioned I've got a software engineer
Mhm.
really focusing on the customer and what the customer needs. And that's generally not something that comes together in an organization, but we're seeing an increased awareness and need for what we're solving for and what need the customer has. How do we get the information, almost a feedback loop together? Because normally a software engineering team is not out interviewing the customers.
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's going to vary, right? Where we can create those opportunities for our talented teams to interact directly with the customer, whether it's going and doing kind of a secret mission in a dealership or setting up a website that's temporary to see how people interact with it and use that data, right, to plan your next move. I mean, those are the kinds of opportunities that you want to create. When that's not possible, right? Relying on people that are doing the market research and understanding, what the marketplace is looking for and communicating that in meaningful ways that we can test and learn pretty quickly. That's really important, and it's hard to do, right? It's hard to bridge some of those structural boundaries of an organization. So you have to really think about how do you want to set that up so that that can happen as naturally as possible.
As you're framing the problem, you're gathering that information, you're saying this keeps coming up in our data, we're seeing some patterns, and we need to solve for this. How do you go about framing what are we solving for?
There's a really great set of disciplines in product management and user experience where really putting yourself in the shoes of that person that's going to use what you're creating. And you can do that a number of ways, right? Building empathy maps, you know, doing interviews, those kind of things. Really taking a step back and making sure that the problem is framed correctly, because oftentimes we think we know a solution before we're really clear on what problem we're trying to solve, and then holding that loosely, right? Because as you start to build things and put them in front of humans, you're going to learn that you were either right or wrong, and you have to be willing to let go of what your original assumptions were if that's where the data points you to.
Not only do we not always get the solution correct the first time, we don't always get the problem we should be solving
Exactly.
correct. You just mentioned some innovative ways of gathering information and data. Throw up a website,
Mhm.
things that some people take years to do.
Mhm.
When you're going about, are we solving for the right problem before we go after the solution, and then testing various solutions? How do you go about designing some of those tests? Because imagine you want to do it, even with almost an unlimited budget, it's about number of resources. You do have limited resources, including time. How do you go about doing that quickly, low cost? I know that you've got some tricks up your sleeve.
Absolutely have tricks up my sleeve. And honestly, the more lean that you can operate, sometimes the more creative you're forced to be. So sometimes big budgets don't necessarily work to your advantage, but it's how do you create the least expensive way to set something up to show whether or not your hypothesis is correct or not, right? In many cases, a good software team will start with not even building software. Like, can we put something on paper? Can we get, set up something, just mock what it is that we want to do to see how somebody interacts with what we think we want to build, and getting that feedback really early and fast, so that you're maximizing the value that you can create in the end.
Because you've mentioned that before of proof of concept and building software, you're not writing any code.
You don't
You
have
should
to
be
be.
you should be
Yeah,
testing it before you've written your first code.
that's
Um,
right.
and you mentioned that with mockups and I'm guessing user experiences. What are some times where you've done that and you've watched the feedback from some of the early testing and thought,
Mhm.
"Whew, what were we smoking that day?"
Yeah, there and actually that's a very valid and desirable outcome, right? Because you don't want to waste your time and money on something that isn't going to work. And so sometimes it can feel counterintuitive to think and operate that way, but it's we need to treasure and value the ideas that we decide to kill because they don't work just as much as the ones that are successful, because then we get more focused, right, on the things that actually are going to work well.
Maybe not get tied to a certain problem or an outcome that you want. 'Cause you said sometimes we've got to kill it.
Mhm.
And you've mentioned in the past, well, sometimes you've got to be willing to abandon it. Um, how do you do that go or no go and stick to that? Because I've seen go or no go successes, it works. Okay, well, what does it work mean? And then they got close to it and thought, well, no, let's just try again. Well, let's just try again. And letting go of that original concept,
Yeah.
and from a psychological and a clarity perspective.
That's a really difficult thing for all of us to do. I'm not going to minimize that emotional fortitude that's required to do that. But what can help is setting up those structures intentionally. So with one of my teams, we had a very intentional cadence for building these types of things where every 90 days we're, and even within that, every 30 days, checking in to say, how far have we come? What have we learned? Do we need to stop, pivot, or amplify what we're doing based on the results so far? And the other thing that's really important to be able to do that well is defining those measures up front. Like what behavior do we want to see? How do we want, what will tell us whether or not we're moving in the right direction? And that requires a little bit of time and energy to think about, what am I testing? How am I going to know whether things are going the way that I want them to or not? But that gives you the structure then to make those
Mhm.
choices at those checkpoints.
You mentioned behaviors that we're looking at because we think measurement as there's a number there. I do a test, I get a number, and there's a pass fail. Um, behaviors is a little more qualitative.
Mhm.
Any examples on how you frame that out or any of your experiences?
If you think of things like a classic e-commerce experience, you really want to put measures inside of that that tell you, where is the person spending their time on the page? Do they actually click through to where you expect them to do? How far do they get into that purchasing funnel? What are the number of people that actually just walk away and don't continue on? So it's really important to instrument your software that way so that you can see how are people interacting with it and then make decisions based on that data. It's especially critical when you're looking at how do you test ideas with a big set of consumers, right? If you're talking about, the US or globally even.
I love it. And with that balancing, sometimes we want to try things just to be able to innovate for the sake of innovating.
Mm.
And as we're testing this out, we want to try. I- Are you going into it, you mentioned with intention and saying, here's exactly the parameters of it. Here's how we're going to test it. Here's how we're going to solve for it. And then customers, you can't just walk down the hallway and grab three of them and involved. Is there a framework that you're using going into this? I mean, you've got decades of work on this.
Um, I don't know so much about framework, but it's really important to have avenues to work with people who will give you that kind of feedback. So doing things like asking your customers to sign up to test things early, like an early access
Mhm.
program, that can give you a great market, right, to test some of these things with. Just going out and walking on the street, or like I said, showing up to a place where you're going to find people that you'd be interested in testing with, like a dealership or some other physical place like that is also a really interesting way. And it can be as simple as you're asking people questions, right, as they come into your store or your marketplace or whatever it is, to get their feedback.
It's incredible because that's it. It's so easy to do, especially for smaller organizations where you do have, you had probably 5 layers at least in between you and your team and the consumers versus those of us who work quite a bit directly with our customer base, maybe setting up committees or customer advisory roundtables or regular check-ins with them and just get into what do you think? What problems are you running into? Where's the friction in that? And especially if they're willing to have it recorded, any number of things that can come out of that.
Absolutely. There's no substitute for having that direct interaction, but in some cases that's just not practical. And so you have to think about how can you get as close to that as you can.
How do you foster an environment, especially when you look at a technical environment, of being able to ask those questions, pardon me, to be able to say, let's try something different. And
Mm,
so many of us see that, pardon me, so many of us see that sometimes as scary
mm,
because we've got to change how we're doing things.
yes. Yeah, and that is so true, Kristen, of all of us in almost every industry right now. And so it's a great thing to ponder, right, for all of us. One thing I do a lot of mentoring for technical professionals who are interested in building their skills in leadership. And given the level of uncertainty and change around all of us in tech, in the world, we have to be willing to operate in a different way where we don't have that certainty. And so the question is, how do we gain that confidence as we continue to move through our lives and through our work and with our customers, right? And the best way to do that is to break the things down that you want to do into smaller pieces, do some of it, and then reflect on how well it went and see if you need to change course or not. Having that muscle to test, learn, adjust, I think is going to be vital to all professionals, no matter what your discipline is, as we enter this really, really
Yeah.
era of fast change.
It's interesting. I saw a quote that change now is the driver of growth and opportunity.
Yeah,
If you're not comfortable with change, that's what's going to drive the growth of
yeah.
our organizations, our own growth and development. You mentioned mentoring professionals in the technical engineering industry. What do you see as some of those traits or any advice for other leaders who maybe didn't come up in that functional area and are challenged? I can't lead this person the same way I can my marketing person or my salesperson or HR.
I think we all need to be somewhat literate in understanding what technology can do for us. And so I would say to somebody that's in that position, ask those kind of questions, right? It's not about the technology itself. It's about what can it do for you. There should always be a purpose, a why. So don't be afraid to ask those questions. And then the, I think in a lot of cases, we're all working with people who offer different strengths and skills to our organizations. And so, how do you marry up people that have complementary skills so that you're getting the most for your business as a whole? I actually recently just joined a new organization, similar kind of role, and that's one of the fun things about this new job for me is it's a new industry, a new company, but my skills in building great software teams is very complementary to the knowledge that they already have inside the organization. So it's a great way to be successful.
It's interesting. You're taking all of those years of experience and you're saying it doesn't matter the industry, it doesn't matter the product, the fundamentals are the same. I love that you hit on cross-functional teams.
Mhm.
What are some ways going into maybe a new organization where it may or may not have had a prior culture of we don't work in silos, we work together, even though we may think we know the answer. We need to walk down the hall or pick up the phone and ask someone who we know may completely disagree with me. How do you instill that or start to adopt that collaboration in a new organization?
That's a fascinating question, Kristen. I'd love to hear your answer too. But for me, it's about one, building the relationships, right? Getting to know people on an individual level first. And what I found is you need to offer something of yourself for others to want to give something back to you. And so being willing to have that vulnerability and then really trying to understand, what is it that their experience is? How has it been going? What things work really well for them? What things don't work well? And how might you partner together to move those things that aren't working so well to a different place? So it doesn't always work, but I'm finding some good success with that. I'd love to talk to you more about when it doesn't work as well.
I'm open. I've got time. What are those signs? Is when it doesn't work, you're
Mhm.
seeing some symptoms of it. That's the
Yeah.
problem. What are some of those things that you've seen in organizations for us to be aware of and go, this might be a collaboration issue. This might be resistance to change issue or resistance to ideas other than my own. What does that look like?
Yeah, it often manifests itself in some sort of conflict that comes up, whether it's, and usually in a larger group discussion has been my experience. So my first approach when that happens is to not at that time, but given a few days, and then go and sit down with that person one on one and just have a very candid conversation. Say, hey, we seem to have gotten off on the wrong foot. Help me understand why. And I found that that has been very effective at disarming people and bringing down kind of that level of resistance. So that's one technique I've used.
It's fascinating how sometimes we let things fester
Mm.
versus just
Oh,
asking,
yeah.
I think this didn't go well. How do we make it go better in the future?
Yeah.
Because that collaboration and being able to bring the different perspectives, you talked about diversity of perspectives, diversity of views. We all bring different experiences to the table, none of which should be discounted. And when you respect that experience, the creativity that can come from it is incredible. I, any examples or situations that you can think of where you thought, no way is this going to work, but something incredible or really cool came out of it?
I love that question. I believe very strongly in the power of teams and unleashing teams. And so I've had many moments in my career where I've wondered, what have I gotten myself into and where is this gonna go? But my approach is try to find that thing that's gonna be the catalyst. And it's interesting, right, that you asked about change, Kristen, because a lot of people think about change as forcing people to do something differently. And that's really, it never works in my experience. I like to think about change as more of a being a catalyst, right? Creating the conditions for the person, the team, the organization that you're trying to move to a new way of operating or a new way of thinking, removing those barriers and being that catalyst so that they can actually embrace what you're offering to them is much more effective, and that can show up in so many different ways, right? giving them examples, breaking the steps down so that they're smaller, highlighting like what it's costing them not to change. So lots of different techniques that you can do to help them overcome that.
I love that you brought up the techniques because in my head, in my work experiences, thinking trying to get a team to work together. Are we doing trust exercises where we're falling backwards and are we getting some foam Nerf bats and letting them loose in the conference room on each other? I go to the extremes of that, and you're saying, no, there are some practical techniques where no one has the potential to be physically harmed unknowingly. I, when you look at those techniques in teams that they may think that they're functional and they're operating, sometimes they're operating, their self-interest is taken care of. When you look at an engineering team where there's so much that evolves and interacts, there's probably no part of an organization right now that isn't impacted by the potential of technology. Um, how are you fostering that we're in it together when they may think that they're operating in that way, but as a leader, you're able to see we really don't have the full potential yet.
I think it's a couple of things. So I'm experiencing that somewhat right now. One is just knowing what good looks like, right? So having had some of that experience yourself, um, involving people in that conversation. So often I find that people know, or teams know, or organizations know what's not working. And they don't really have an avenue or they don't feel comfortable with surfacing that. And so just asking the question of, what isn't working well here? And in a very neutral way, and helping to think through like, okay, how can we make it better together? So that that team, that organization, they're enrolled in the process of, helping to become better and better. And it's not a one-time conversation. It's something that needs to happen on a regular basis, because things change. Sometimes there's a lot of opportunities for improvement. We have to pick the one or two that are going to be most impactful now, work on those, and then come back and say, okay, now that we've done that, what's the next thing? Or what has changed? And so making that a regular part of your organization where they become a self-learning, self improving unit is, I think, that where the true power lies.
That's interesting. You're giving them a few tools and the space and freedom
Hmm.
to test and fail or test and succeed.
Hmm.
And we talked about doing that in a collaborative environment because it's a whole lot easier to, if something doesn't go right and you lose that game as a team, it's not quite the same thing if it's all on one person's shoulders. So being able to share some of that as well as the success. I love that you said you're constantly improving, trying thing and asking. I remember back decades ago, what does good look like? I worked in a company was bought out, worked in a very large company, and their leadership had something called the 3x3. And anytime they just have a conversation, might be not your boss or someone from another other department, and they'd say, "Tell me three things that are going well and they're working, and three things that aren't."
Love that.
And then we just have a conversation. It was just open as to why is it not working?
Hmm.
Because it might be working for their department, but
Hmm.
it's not working for ours, and we've never talked about it, and no one
Yeah.
knows what you're going through and you're experiencing.
Yeah, and you said something really important there, Kristen, too, is giving the team or your organization space to do that. I think one of the things that I've seen that can be short-sighted is we try to maximize the amount of work or output that our organizations can produce. But if we allocate just some of that time and support, right, that
Mhm.
reflection and the opportunity to actually work on improvements, you can get so much further in the long run. And so that would be one thing I would encourage others in the industry to really think about.
In coming back to where we started on kind of what are we solving for, sometimes the three things that aren't going right, we could solve for one thing and all three of those would go away, or they could
Yes,
be three very separate. And I love some of that problem statement. What am I solving for? There's a second half to that you've mentioned, which is, and what impact am I expecting? What is the outcome? What do I expect it to look like after I solve for it?
that's right.
And we stop and think, huh, do I really? But if I solve for this, this is the outcome. Is that the outcome I want? And maybe we start there. What do I want this
Mhm.
to look like at the end? And that might decide a different set of, oh, that doesn't matter because what I want is this. If I solve for that, I'm only going to solve for half of the equation.
Yeah, and the other thing I would add to that, Kristen, is thinking about that, writing it down, and sharing it with your organization is super
Agree.
important because there are other people in your team, your peers, the rest of your organization that might look at what you're trying to accomplish and say, "Hey, I can help with that," or it motivates the people to work together to find other approaches. So it doesn't have to be just you doing that on your own.
I love that advice for sharing. There's one other thing that I really wanted to tap into with you here because when you say what does good look like, you've been part of a large, incredible organization with a lot of resources, including a women's leadership program. And I know it's one of the passions of yours. I'd love for you to share a little bit about that.
Yeah, I've been very fortunate, Kristen, to have this great career in tech that has enabled me to have an incredible life. Traveling to places I might not have otherwise gone, meeting people I might not have otherwise met, being successful financially, and being able to share that in the community. And so I'm really passionate about encouraging and supporting other women to help them find the similar path and really be able to gain that power to be that in their community and for others as well. So I part of an organization that really fosters that from a very young age all the way up through career development along the way. So um, love to see other women just thrive in these roles as well.
I'm going to pick on one word there, as it's so interesting. You mentioned the word power.
Mm,
As growing up, I'm definitely an Xer. Uh, the word power was almost a dirty word. Growing
mm,
up as a female, and especially a female in business and in male-dominated industries, um, we didn't seek to hold power
it's-
because it was the perspective of that word was very different. How are you interpreting it, and how are you holding that as, "No, this is something we want to seek"?
Yeah, it's a fascinating question, and you're right, especially for us women, right? It's a very controversial word sometimes,
Yeah.
but it's really about, for me, it's about owning your abilities and standing confidently in those and leveraging those skills, abilities, your assets to lift other people up. That's really what that power means to me, whether it's inside of a business organization or outside in the community. Having taken care of yourself allows you to give to others. And so that's what that power means to me.
And you have done so much, Jerry. When you look at the thousands of individuals and the teams across your career that you've been able to lead across genders, cultures, whatever it is, I think what you just said, um, I would almost put at the core of our conversation in looking at how do you foster that collaboration amongst teams, amongst individuals to seek not just a new way of doing things and new for new, but seek a better way that's going to serve the organization, the people in it, and the customers that we serve. That's incredible. What advice would you give for leaders who are looking to either transform their organization and embrace that speed of change, that flexibility that we need to have, especially if their organization is or industry is not known for trying new things? What advice would you give? 'Cause I'm hearing that a lot from business owners of, I want to do this. I want to do, I can see a future. And my team is going, whoa, whoa, whoa. Let's back that horse up. I trying something new. I'm not so sure about that. What advice would you give for leaders really looking to, God, looking around, there's so much opportunity out there.
My number one piece of advice, Kristen, is to start, right? Just get started. In my experience with working with hundreds of different teams, the hardest part is starting and getting through that first 2, 3, 4 months where doing it in a different way is harder than it was to do it the way you were always doing it. But once you get over that initial, I'll call it muscle memory of trying to work in a different way, then you start to realize the benefits, and the people in your organization will start to say, ah, I get it. This is actually better. I would never go back to the way that I was doing it before. But that hardest part is just getting them started.
I love it. And sometimes it can be what am I solving for? What's my problem statement? Type it
Mhm.
up on my computer, sit with it, and then walk down the hall and share it.
Yeah,
And get that village, get that team, that tribe, and it makes it so much easier.
yeah,
Uh, Amy, thank you for all that you have shared, your wisdom. And I think you had mentioned it, that vulnerability of it doesn't always work. And
yeah.
I'm testament of that. But here's how you move forward and make it even better.
Pleasure to talk to you today, Kristen.
I'm sure that we will talk again. I've got any number of ideas just from our discussion today. Collaboration is key. Amy, until next time, have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you.